I'm Arliss Prass, Chief Community Officer for Breakthrough Schools. A little bit about my background. So this is probably at this point, probably my 16th year in education. I spent about half of those years as a classroom teacher in both traditional district as well as a charter school space. And then the additional time I've served on both state level as well as supporting culture work at charter schools, as well as to really just trying to ensure and prioritize that regardless of the state or the city, that our families' needs are prioritized and met, and our scholars' learning takes priority. So.
Super. And Andrew, a little bit, just so people get to know you.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Andrew McRae. I'm the Chief Academic Officer here at Breakthrough. My background is as a classroom teacher, school administrator, dean of instruction, principal, and executive. I came to Breakthrough. I spent most of my career in sort of large, reputable charter management organizations across the country, and came to Breakthrough originally actually supporting, working with the preps on some leadership development work at one of our campuses, then eventually became the model leader of our citizens leadership model. And as a part of that work and the sort of exploration of where we were at that moment in time, ended up being the primary architect of our new organization, Breakthrough Public Schools, and its corresponding network academic team and structure.
Beautiful, thanks. Hey, so Arliss, Chief Community Officer, why don't you tell us kind of like your major responsibilities as the Chief Community Officer, and go ahead.
Sure. I will share, I'll share two of what those responsibilities are, because it most relates to our work with families. And so one, I'm responsible for helping to design, pilot, and provide a network-wide adoption of a really intentional family partnership strategy, right? So I'll say that again. I'm responsible for the designing, piloting, network-wide adoption of our family partnership strategy. So that means really investigate, interrogating what our families' needs are and how we as Breakthrough Public Schools are best able to ensure that we meet those needs as it relates to, one, a scholar's academic and socio-emotional success and preparedness, not just at Breakthrough, but also for life after Breakthrough. And that means working really closely with Andrew and his team, because we know that families and academics go hand in hand. And if it is that we are, if we want to ensure like sustainable success of our scholars, then the work with academics must be prioritized. And I would also share another big bucket of my work is providing excellent customer service to our families, right? Because we value our partnership with our families. And because we value our partnership, we need to ensure that as an organization, regardless of which school, which campus, which staff person they have a conversation with, we are providing a high quality of service to that family and to that scholar. I would say like those are my two big buckets of work, because families come first, right? And we want to ensure that because families come first, that is the area that we will first tackle. But not that our work in the areas of marketing or enrollment is not a priority. But if it is that we value our customers and we provide them with a high quality of service, then the enrollment part will sort of like take care of itself, and wanting to ensure that as an organization, we first focus on what that partnership with our family really, really looks like, because research shows that our families want to be partners with us. And if it is that we are able to just not recruit, but also retain our families and provide a higher level of service, then that will continue to be true.
Yeah, and I was going to say the customer service has probably a direct correlation on retaining families and lowering attrition, which is really important to us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Andrew, you touched on something earlier, but I think the folks on the school would be really interested to learn about the transition from the old first 10 years of Breakthrough, which was model centric and a bit siloed, into your vision, which was one Breakthrough. Maybe you could kind of walk us through that a little bit, and so people understand where we were and where we are now and where we're going.
Yeah, so I would say that like the where we were, I think that Breakthrough, as I'm sure many of the people on this call know, sort of evolved from sort of the singular program to schools to a network of schools, where the Breakthrough team served as sort of a shared services organization to provide centralized support. But Breakthrough as a network operated as three sort of semi-autonomous models. And what we recognized as the models grew and scaled is that Breakthrough had all of the problems of scale, but really none of the benefits. And what became clear once I became model leader of the CLs is that me and my fellow model leaders felt like we could do more for kids together than we could apart. That we believe that every kid and every family deserved the benefit of our collective wisdom and our collective resources. And so over the course of the past year and a half, we've been on a journey to sort of create a new vision for what Breakthrough public schools could be. And that vision is fairly simple. It was organized under a framework we call the Better Together Initiative, and it's organized around three core commitments to families and our school community. The first is that leaders are the unit of change and the greatest determinant of success for our schools. And so for us, that meant that we needed to build an apparatus that allowed us to support, coach, train, and develop leaders so that they can drive excellent outcomes and excellent experiences for kids. The second was that everyone learns and everyone grows together. So when you had the three models, how a teacher or leader grew and developed, and the resources associated with their school community were really highly reliant on their specific school and their specific model. We don't believe that that in our evolved place can be true, and that that contributes to inconsistent experiences, both for our staff members and for kids. And so by really being able to build network-wide leadership and network-wide programming support, we get to take advantage of some economies of scale, but also standardize the approach and beliefs and create more transferability for talent across the network. And then I would say lastly, our core belief was that every scholar gets the very best experience and outcomes every single day. And so when we make a commitment at the scholar level to every scholar at Breakthrough, it no longer matters if you're at a prep school or a CL school or a CA school. We're saying if you're at a Breakthrough school, you don't have to win multiple lotteries. You don't have to win the lottery to get in the Breakthrough. You don't have to win the lottery to get in the right school at Breakthrough. You don't have to win the lottery to get in the right classroom at that school. That no matter where you are, you're going to have an excellent experience. And I think that commitment led us to do some big things. The first, it led us to dissolve our former model structure and create what's known as the network academic team to oversee whose job it is to set the academic and instructional vision for the network, and then support and provide support to achieve that vision through curriculum, through content, through teacher and leader training, and through exceptional student education. And so for us, it meant evolving from our more decentralized structure and evolving into a structure that allowed us to be able to retain many of the core elements of our school community, operationalize pretty nationally normed best practices for charter school management, and to get that collective benefit that we talked about, that I talked about earlier.
So just to follow up to that, Andrew, so, a lot of people I talk to, donors, just many folks are amazed of the way we were able to transform the organization during a COVID shutdown, and you building a new academic team. I mean, I don't know how many, maybe you could tell us how many people you had to hire, but you did it all remotely, and your team came together remotely, and you still pulled this off. What was that like? How did you hire, build, and train remotely?
You know, when you say it like that, it's kind of overwhelming. In reflection, I would say that there were, I would say one, I didn't do it alone. I had extraordinary people assisting me, from external support services to the great Cassandra Sanders, who's our managing director of talent acquisition, who helped usher me and was my partner through hiring and onboarding 16 new people. Because as of January 2020, I was literally the only employee on the network academic team. It was just me. And so I think that was a little sort of critical piece. I think but to answer your question, it was really about thinking about, how do we keep our values-based approach? If our values say that we're going to commit to leaders as the unit of change, then that means you're going to find best-in-class talent that we can find and bring them onto the team, give them a set of clear expectations and deliverables, and then get out of their way and remove obstacles to allow them to build and create the network. It meant really being clear with the network from a communication standpoint and with my colleagues around what we were going to prioritize and what we weren't, what was going to be our operating model and strategy and what wasn't. And it also meant making some really hard and potentially risky calls out front. I mean, we were one of the first networks in Ohio to say, we're going to be remote in the midst of the pandemic. And that radically changed the importance and the decision-making power of the network academic team. It meant that we had to do things differently much more quickly than we wanted to. And that was both an extraordinary blessing and, in the front end, a bit of a curse. It meant when you're bringing change to people that fast, who may not be ready for it, but it has to happen, means that you have to adopt a philosophy that says we have to change behavior before we change beliefs. And while that might be my preferred methodology, I recognize that it is not the legacy practice of a place like Breakthrough. And I think really dealing with the residue of legacy practices and mindsets was really challenging, on top of trying to navigate, a horrific global pandemic that was destroying our communities and many of our own families. And so I think those things were actually quite challenging. But to close, the main thing was keeping our values up front, establishing really clear decision-making criteria and values-based and values-aligned criteria, and then just being relentless about our approach, our methodology, what we think is important, and not letting anything compromise that.
So just a quick follow-up to that, Andrew, before I move over to Arliss. When you say you built a new network academic team, some of those folks came from within, right? They got to apply for some of these new jobs in the team, and then many you brought in from other great organizations around the country. Is that right?
Yep. So about 40% of the network academic team were former existing Breakthrough staffs who either changed roles or changed, pretty much everyone changed roles except for Chris O'Brien. His role sort of just expanded. But it was really about making sure that, we have really smart, really talented people. What we wanted to build was a way to develop them more effectively and utilize them to impact more kids. And I think that the other reality is that when you're trying to build something new and you want to evolve, we have to be able to bring in talent from places where people learn differently. I tell my team all the time, I like smart people who disagree with me. And the idea there is to say, how do we get to the best decision, not Andrew's decision or Arliss's decision, but the best decision for kids and families. And that's been just a really exciting part of this journey.
Well, hats off to you and your team for doing all this during a remote year and a COVID year. And I mean, it's one thing if you already had the team together for a year and then to switch to remote, but when you had to do everything at once, it's just amazing what you did. Hey, Arliss, given, you talked about intentional family partnership strategy. It's a real priority for you guys. What are we doing this year to support that priority and maybe contrast it to what we've done in the past but just kind of fill us in on the ground of what you're planning on doing.
In our upcoming year, Tracy?
Right. Yes.
So in our upcoming year, we are really focused on, I would say, like, making sure that our families continue to like trust us, right? What does that mean? That means that we have not experienced in-person learning for about, I don't know, 18 months or so. And so, like, how do we, for our new families, right? Like, how do we intentionally build those relationships? It starts with the welcome telephone call or the recruitment call. Like, how do we intentionally build those relationships and continue to maintain those relationships with our families? How do we intentionally let our families know that they're just not a seat, right? They're scholars' academic success. Like, that's something that we take personally, and we will continue to take personally so long as I'm Chief Community Officer and Andrew continues to be Chief Academic Officer. That's something that we take personally. And so, starting first with the relational before getting to anything more tactical or technical or structural, because families first need to know that we care about them and we prioritize their scholars. And with building that trust, right, which is part of our approach, with building that trust, we will then be able to infuse, the academics, the social emotional learning, and we want to be able to let our families know, like, they are co-creators with us in our scholars. I'm saying our scholars' experience, right? And being able to provide that space and that agency for our families. Again, to Andrew's point, this is new, right? The legacy structure that existed before did not necessarily prioritize, right, our intentional family partnership in this way. And so really wanting to name for our families, like, we value you, we care about you, we hear you, and we will demonstrate that by making sure that, one, we call, right, welcome. Two, continue to build that relationship, wanting to learn who's that scholar? Tell me about your scholar. What do I need to know and learn about them so that we can truly be co-creators in an excellent experience, not just academically, but also in their social emotional development.
That's awesome. And Arliss, how will you guys know if it's working?
Data, right? Data. I think, like, I believe in being able to create the systems and structures that let us know how we're progress monitoring towards our goal, right? And in certain ways, we are building that. I'm saying we are building that from the ground. And so I anticipate that next year, especially given the newness of this office and our work, next year is really about, like, what's our baseline data telling us, right? And creating the infrastructure to support not just the collection of that data, but the progress monitoring and being able to course correct in areas where that may be needed, but also being able to, like, highlight our best practices and celebrate, right? Being able to celebrate what's working well.
Cool. And there's a great follow-up that happens to be in the chat. I would encourage all of you to start putting questions in the chat, and I'll relay them. But this one's right on point, Arliss, and it's a question that says, what are the roles of parents ideally, and what are the common gaps that we're working against? Can you comment?
What are the roles of parents?
What are the roles of parents, ideally, and what are common gaps that you're working against? That's the exact question in the chat.
Yeah, so I think big picture, the role of our families is really to be, like, co-creators with us, right? So that means being able to support, right, at home, their scholars, not just academic learning, but also socio-emotional development, and being able to have two-way conversations, right, with us as a network and with teachers and with our schools. So, for lack of a better word, being able to have enough agency where families really say, like, I have a voice and I need for my voice to be heard, so that they are co-creators in that work. So I would see the role of not just the parent, but the role of our families is really to help us to co-create their scholars' academic and social emotional experience. and what are some of those gaps? I think I'll probably just name the most obvious one, right? Like one, our office is new, and I think our approach as a network for our families is new, and wanting that to be known so that our families understand that it is, I don't want to say it's not business as usual, right? It's not business as usual. My office, as well as we'll be hiring 2 additional staff to really support operationalizing our work at the school level to ensure there's more of an intimate touch point with our families, ensuring like that's communicated, and also helping to build a small army of family supporters, right? Not just at the network level, but also at the school level. I would say that is somewhat of a gap, but also the fact that we've been remote and we haven't necessarily had the opportunity to make those in-person connections, where we know a lot of that in-person connections, like really, really relational. That would be a gap, but it's something that we're overcoming because we've been back, in the building and being able to meet families on Monday mornings and like really follow up with them and like say like, how can we serve, right? How can we serve? And I know that our recruitment and enrollment team, they go above and beyond in ensuring to build that connection with prospective families so that the feeling of being welcomed and the feeling of being warm continues after that process has ended.
Super. Hey, Sanjay, you can go off of mute. It was your question. Did I phrase the question properly, and did you hear what you needed to hear, or do you want to take a shot at rephrasing it for Arliss, or are you good?
No, I think that was great. I was just curious because I'm thinking about other school systems like KIPP, like Success, and how they're viewing the parents in that light. And so it's interesting to hear Arliss describe the role that she wants for the families. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Sanjay. Okay, everybody, I'm going to throw one more last question at Andrew, and has multiple threads to it. And then I want everybody else to get your questions ready and throw them in the chat. I see a couple are lining up there already. But Andrew, so, we're retaining more scholars than in our historical average. We're recruiting more. There's going to be a whole bunch of kids coming to school in August, September, some of whom have never been in a school before, some of which have already been in our schools, some of which came from CMSD. What's it going to be like returning to school this August compared to other years in your estimation? I know there's a lot packed in there.
I think it's a good question. I think I would start with this year is incomparable to any other year. So the first thing I would say is like, we have to throw off the schema of 2019. We can't solve 2021 problems with 2019 thinking. There has never been a time in human history short of 1916 when we were at mass trying to bring populations of school-age children following a global catastrophic disruption into an educational environment again. When also recognizing that Breakthrough serves children largely of poverty, largely Black children, in particularly in communities that were disproportionately impacted in Cleveland, Ohio, and Cuyahoga County by the COVID-19 virus, like that context exacerbates what we are trying to accomplish. So no, there is no comparison point. But the question is, what is it going to look like and how do we prepare? Well, as I said to families last week, and I'll say to all of you now, the reality for us is like at Breakthrough, we are thinking about how to open our schools in the most culturally responsive, human identifying and dignified and safe way. For us, we are really confident that we can provide an excellent education for kids, and we are doing a whole host of things to deliver on that promise, the academic promise we make to kids and families. But what's going to be different is that we are making big investments in student therapeutic services, in student counseling and social work, in being able to train every single educator in this network on how to use therapeutic methodology and interventions to respond to a kid in trauma. And thinking about how we manage the adults who also lived that experience. The other reality, as you alluded to, Jay-Z, is that the last time the kids in the fall have been in a breakthrough school full time was 2 years ago. So this fall's 8th graders who will be going off to high school were 6th graders when they left. Our kindergartners and 1st graders will never have been in a school building. And so when we think about what we are endeavoring to do from a change management and enrollment and engagement perspective, it's not ever been a part of Breakthrough's history. And so what we're excited about is that we're going to continue to lead in a values-aligned way. And those values were simple. One, we're going to make decisions that we believe are in the physical, emotional, and mental well-being of our students and families and our staff. And that has been our orientation. What I think is also great is that there are a number of COVID keepers that we've learned over the course of this journey that make that transition easier. There are things like how we leverage technology to address unfinished learning that is going to allow us to continue to provide individualized academic gains for kids while simultaneously ensuring that they receive grade level instruction, which is the best way to ensure that they accelerate and aren't stuck in a cycle of being behind for their lifetimes. What we also are able to do is, like, because we have these learnings of how to do professional development, how to do adult learning, how to do adult support remotely, it's going to allow us to be able to leverage the technology to continue to ensure even more people learn and grow together every day, to make sure that our principals and our deans and our teachers continue to receive the quality of professional development that they have looked forward to. And I would say lastly, when I think about the biggest shift, is that while there are going to be practical operational things that are going to be a part of in Andrew's crystal ball, our lived experience for the next 36 months, things like quarantines and shutdowns, et cetera. What will be different is that we will be better equipped as a network to respond in the moment so that academic learning and disruption for those scholars is not what is sacrificed as we manage through whatever the situation is. And I think those are the kinds of things that I think are going to set apart our experience and our student staff, particularly our student experience and our staff experience for our families.
Great answer. And there's another question in the chat that I think you kind of just answered, but I want to read it to you to see if you want to put any, just tweak it slightly. But first of all, it starts out with a huge thanks to Andrew and Arliss for all the successes. And the question is, and I think you answered, will we be able to adopt some of the remote learning tools to become blended learning system next year? In other words, what you said, we'll be ready for it, but are we actually going to, and you and I were just on a phone call half an hour earlier about technology in the home and the school. So what do you envision with not only coming back in person, but also doing, using technology to enhance the learning at home, perhaps?
So I want to make sure we're not mixing terms here. Breakthrough is not a blended learning network, and I have no vision to drive that change for us at this point. We do our best work with kids in person, and we will continue to operate in that way. So I want to be really explicit about that. What I do think, in the spirit of the question, is that what we have learned over the course of this year is that we can quickly adapt and adopt technological platforms to help increase learning time, to help reduce barriers to communications with families, and to help ensure that we have valid and reliable and predictable metrics and data for kids. And so, yes, we intend to take all of that with us. That would look like, for example, if a scholar were to be sick or be at home, to still have access to their self-directed learning programs. It might mean that if a scholar is looking to have a specific enhancement in a specific area, that the teacher could create educational playlists using some of the programs and tools that we already have that allow them to do that work. It's about using our AI program that allows our younger scholars to get feedback on how they pronounce words and how they read aloud in order to give them real-time support. Those things are things that we operationalize in this context, and we intend to be able to do as we return back to school. I think there is a future question about when, with, and how we, as the world evolves and as this work of educating scholars evolves, does Breakthrough imagine the opportunity to educate kids remotely solely, I think is a complex future question, but it's definitely out of the scope of sort of what me and my team are focused on over the course of the next several years.
Got it. Thanks. Here's one in the
Hey.
chat, and Arliss, I think, go ahead. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say that there are a couple of questions that came directly to me that I want to lift up for the group, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Great. One of those questions was, what are the biggest concerns of families today? And that's connected to also if we do satisfaction surveys for scholars and parents. So I'll start with the most obvious concerns, right, of our families, and that is the health and safety of our scholars, right? So that's one. And then also, how will we be able to bridge the gap of learning loss? And I would say, one, our ops team is phenomenal in being able to really be kept abreast with and being able to provide best practice recommendations going into next fall. So our families indicated last fall, like they were not ready to be fully in person this spring. However, given the change in current health status, et cetera, in the fall, most of our families will be more comfortable with returning to school in person. And so the health and safety has continued to be a concern for our families. And we are continuing to communicate what our plan, what our strategy will be in preparation for the fall. And also the other concern is just around like, how will we bridge that gap, right, of unfinished learning? And as Andrew alluded to, the plan that we have in place academically to meet not just the academic, but the social and also like the culturally responsive nature of our learning will be prioritized. And I am really, really grateful for one of the partnerships that we have with ODA to help our kids begin to get back into the flow of not just the quote unquote classroom space, but being able to come into this summer with having some true summer experiences and being able to socialize with peers their age in preparation for our re-entry into the classroom. So Lauren, I hope that helped to answer your question. And if not, you can hopefully come off mute and share if it did not.
Okay, if Lauren jumps in, that's fine. We have another one in the chat that it's for you, Arliss, kind of. It says, as we look toward the fall, and this is very on the ground question. What are the key building blocks you will use to build family relationships? Because he says, I'm trying to better understand how we can accomplish things that maybe other school districts such as CMSD cannot. So I guess what we're looking for is what are we doing differently?
Yeah, great question. One of the key focus areas for my office in partnership with the academic world, we are prioritizing something we will call academic partnering, right? What does that look, sound, and feel like? It looks like really communicating with our families early on that we will engage them in approximately 3 rounds or 3 series of conversations throughout the course of the year that is geared towards not just goal setting, but also strategies that they're able to incorporate at home with their scholars so as to help support their learning. The platform that would be used to really ground some of those conversations, it's already part of Breakthrough's practice. And so really grounding in a concrete, tangible way that you can see, how did scholars grow? If they did grow, what did that look like? If they didn't grow, what gaps are they experiencing? And like, how can we bridge those gaps? And as a network, we are pushing that forward because academic partnering or really having strategic conversations with families or about scholars learning, research has indicated that that is one of the highest leverage things that you can engage in so as to support scholars academically. And if it is that I needed to, not that we're promoting violence, Andrew, but if Andrew and I needed to fight about something, that is what we would fight about, because I feel so strongly that this has to be the pivot for Breakthrough as an organization, and not necessarily the work that may be happening at this in silos at specific schools, but as a network, we have to systematize our approach to how we partner academically with our families.
Great. Here's one, Andrew says, in an ancient era, I took civics in 8th grade. Do we do something like that in our curriculum?
So I'm not really sure that sort of civics as a course exists anymore in sort of the current landscape, but what we are doing as a part of the Better Together initiative for really the first time at Breakthrough is creating a cohesive approach to how we think about and how we teach history curriculum from multiple perspectives. And while I agree that civics and its corollaries like American history and European history and what we currently call the classics are helpful to help shaping people's worldview, what we're critically focused on with the History Advisory Board and the History Curricular Task Force is really making sure that we bring in the multiple perspectives of the lived experiences of folks experiencing our history content to make sure that students and who are at Breakthrough can engage in that content from multiple perspectives. So the answer is yes, and the way we all might have learned it is insufficient for the time that we're in right now. There was also a related question I saw in the chat around how we're using sort of the content areas in order to increase greater cultural literacy. And I think that there are a couple of things. One, what we know is that as a network, we've prioritized literacy instruction and addressing unfinished learning. And so what we know is that one of the most often underutilized ways for that to happen is through what people call the content areas, right? So through science and social studies, which play a critical role in helping kids build the content knowledge that they need and apply that to, those nonfiction literacy skills to apply in context. And so we think that those, we do intend to do that work. One of the things we did this year was really investing in a network-wide sort of inquiry-based science curricula that allowed us to be able to bring that learning to kids this year. Next year, we'll be taking on history as well, because we did science, math, and literacy this school year, as well as the redesign of our accelerated learning blocks, both for the virtual context, and then of course we'll be redesigning it again for a return in school next year. And so I wanted to make sure that that was clear and that was answered. And then I think there are two related questions that I want to just knock out because they might not seem peer related. The question was sort of how significant is the level of unfinished learning? So let's talk about the difference between unfinished learning and learning loss. There are a whole lot of people banging drums and writing articles about learning loss, which I think is a misnomer. The reality is that for most of the kids that are most severely impacted, there was unfinished learning before the pandemic. There were kids multiple grade levels behind before the pandemic. And so in our response, what it did was it gave us an opportunity to reimagine the systems we were using to address that gap. At Breakthrough, there were a large amount of kids who still had unfinished learning. And so what that says to us is, okay, how do we accelerate so that kids can catch up to grade level content? And how do we make that personalized because every kid's not starting from the same place? And so I would say that the way that we agree on that is that you agree on an evidence-based, research-aligned universal screener that gives you where kids are. At Breakthrough, for us, we primarily use iReady to do that. We were a MAP district for a long time, and we think MAP's great, but we believe that the ability for iReady to integrate across multiple platforms and be used for multiple purposes allows us to be able to do that work more effectively and more efficiently. Second, you use additional screeners for content. So we're going to be going with corrective reading to help us understand sort of where scholars are in terms of their literacy development, because what you don't see is middle school kids getting taught decoding and fluency, even if they need decoding and fluency, right? And so we're saying, no, I don't care if you're a 7th grader. If you don't read on 7th grade level, we're going to provide you supports that you need to help you get there. Because when you left us, you were a 5th grader, right? And so they're just, those are like some of the things and some of the ways that we're thinking about this from both a sort of tactical level, but also a sort of overarching strategic level that works together. And then I would say, lastly, there's one other question that I think is worthy of air. And there's this question about what are the challenges or opportunities that are not obvious for when we return? And I'm going to start with the opportunities. I think there's an opportunity to radically transform how we engage with families, to Arliss's point. There's an opportunity to leverage technology to close the gap between school and home in ways that we've never been able to do so before. I think there's an opportunity to use technology to address unfinished learning, to optimize and really knock the lid off of unfinished learning through self-directed programming with the right amount of motivation and oversight and direction from teachers and leaders. I think there's an opportunity to really help shape a different national conversation about education writ large as we start to recognize the benefits of personalized learning in a very real way. And it goes off this like obscure education geek shelf and becomes to the mainstream. I would say the biggest challenges are the challenges that, one, we don't normally see and can't see, but two, are things we don't think of. As I said, one, there are going to be multiple grade levels of kids across the country who've never been in a school building. They have to make that transition. How you start school in any school is not going to be the way that they started school 2 years ago. It can't be. And if it is, it's criminal because it's not the same. Two, human talent. Nobody wants to move jobs in a pandemic when a whole bunch of people are using jobs. But when you start to open up and people start to consider transitions, how do you attract the kind of talent you're looking for in a market where people aren't really trying to move jobs? It doesn't mean that you don't still have openings, because as I said at the outset, we just reorged the whole organization. So that meant that there are people moving around and we have gaps and human talent needs that underpin that vision that we have to make sure that we plug. And so how do you do that and you navigate it in a pandemic context? And then I would say the last thing that I think we're not really thinking about and haven't managed yet is the adult mental health challenge. The reality is a big chunk of our workforce are single young adults, 28 to 21. And so when we think about like, how do we help people who have been isolated over the course of the year, who have answered every call, stood up to every challenge, did everything we've asked of them under extraordinary circumstances? How do, as they come back to normalcy, we ensure that they are healthy and happy and taken care of so that they can then help take care of our children? And I think that, you know, it is easy to fall in love with that hero narrative of like, we do what's best for kids, the kids come first, et cetera, et cetera. But kids are attached to families, so we have to support those families in this work. And schools don't exist without teachers and leaders. And so we have to provide strategic, thoughtful resources and supports to those folks. And I think that we are only scratching the surface of what's possible.
Excellent observation. Here's one in the chat that is, you don't hear this one much anymore, or you don't hear this much at all, but it says, been very challenging for Breakthrough and our scholars. You know, we've been out for a year and a half. Based on this experience, are there things we won't do anymore in the classroom based on the fact that we haven't been in the classroom for a year and a half?
I mean, I think that there are some, but they're going to be more practical and sort of at the school level. I mean, I think one of the things that we're thinking a lot about is like how we approach discipline, particularly exclusionary discipline. The reality for me is that like, you're going to have to pretty much fight me to get a kid out of a classroom in this context. One, because we know that like what we need to do in terms of provide educational services requires kids to be at school, and what we need to provide therapeutic services after experiencing this horrible trauma, like needs to be in school. So that's one of the things that like we're really going to be thinking about. I think the second thing that we're going to be really critically thinking about is whether or not we, you know, how we approach adult learning. Beforehand, you know, we would sit folks in a room for 4 hours and all get the same one size fits all PD, and that's great. And then we pat ourselves on the back and then ask you why you ain't doing it when we come back 2 days later. Like, that approach isn't going to work anymore. What we know is that adults in this context need more personalized support and more personalized development. And so that means we, meaning the people doing the designing and the supporting of the other adults, have to think differently about how we approach that and approach our professional development and our learning experiences in an applied way. And so I would say the third thing that I was just say big, and I'm going to leave some space for Arliss to talk about this as well. But I think the third thing that we're really trying to make sure that we don't bring back into the classroom is this idea about how, like, what a young person's reaction is supposed to be to things that don't go their way, right? And I think this is especially true in our elementary schools. You know, most charter schools across the network have evolved away from the sort of no excuses, do it this way model. We don't believe that joy and structure are mutually exclusive. To be clear, at Breakthrough, we believe you can have both. But what we want to do is we also want to create space for young people to be able to have voice, for young people to be able to express their feelings and thoughts in a thoughtful way, and for them to be treated with dignity and humanity all the time, even when they are not expressing that to us. And I think that those are the kinds of things that, like, we're really thinking about at a strategic level. And then there are practical things like, you know, we're not going to be arguing with families over, like, uniform shoes and belts and nonsense like that. Like, it just, like, we will address the problem, but we're not going to let that be a barrier to kids getting access to the things that we know that they need.
Super. We are winding down time. There's quite a few compliments for you guys in the chat, which you can read. Oh, wait a minute. Here's something that says, I did not understand the discipline comment. If a child is disrupting the class, how do teachers handle it? I didn't understand if Andrew was saying, don't ask that child to leave. Maybe you could just be a little precise. I think what you're saying is we still have to have discipline, but kicking a kid out of the classroom doesn't help anybody. Is that kind of where? Yeah.
And I would challenge the reality that if a kid is disrupting the classroom, that the only solution is to remove them.
Yeah. Yeah, it just says, how do teachers handle it? That was the question. How do teachers handle it?
I think teachers can handle it a number of ways. I think you could, one, move the child closer to you. You could have a conference with the child. You can call another adult into the room to have that conference with the child. The idea is not to say that we're going to just let kids disrupt classrooms. I think we can all agree that that would be impractical. But what it is saying is that we are thinking about how do we ensure even that child that is being disruptive gets access to the education we know they need in context.
Right, good. Okay, well, we're pretty much winding down, but I want to give anybody a chance who wants to come off of mute to say anything. It can be a question, it can be a comment, but I'm going to close my chat and just, if anybody wants to pipe in and speak with Arliss or Andrew, now is the time. Just take yourself off mute. I'm looking around. I'm not seeing lips moving, which means they're on mute. So, all right. Well, in that case, big applause to Andrew and Arliss. We appreciate you guys very much. I know everybody on the call is writing notes all over about how lucky we are to have you guys and what a great job you're doing, and the reactions on the screens you can see. But anyway, thank you, Arliss, Andrew. I know you guys are extremely busy. You've given us a nice chunk of your time, and I know everybody on the call appreciates, you know, we don't get a chance to do this very often, because when visitors visit schools, they get a glimpse of what's going on, but they never really get a chance to sit down and chat with you guys. So this was a very nice blessing for us, and we appreciate it very much. And
thank you all.
Yep.
And to everybody else, if you like what you hear on these, this was our third in a series of 3 conversations. The attendance on each one has gotten better and better, and I think we may want to keep doing this at some point in the future. What do you think, Katie, in the fall? We're going to do a speaker series in the fall as well. So we'll try to keep this going. Everybody, thank you so much. Any feedback, shoot me an email. Andrew and Arliss, take care.
Thank you.
Arliss and Andrew, keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Well, you guys have a great day.